it seems to have been pretty prominent in the news this week, and a pretty scary potential in the future that there is a looming global food crisis. Well, I mean, we're currently in the global food crisis, but it's being exacerbated by events going on around the world. Namely, well, I mean, first of all, the pandemic did not help global food supplies. And then, of course, we've got the war in Ukraine. And Ukraine is known as the world's bread bin, I think, because it produces so much of the world's wheat supply. I think between Russia and Ukraine, they produce a third of the world's wheat supply. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. And it produces 10% of the world's corn.
And I think it's half of the world's sunflower oil as well, isn't it? Just crazy stat.
Bread basket, sorry, not bread bin. Ukraine's known as. Bread bin doesn't sound as good.
Although it would last for longer.
That's
a
very
basket
true.
is open, it's going to go stale pretty quickly.
That's true.
That's true.
And I saw a news article this week saying that a food insecurity expert predicts that there's only 10 weeks of wheat supplies left in the world as the Russian invasion disrupts production. And this was Sarah Menker, the CEO of agriculture and analytics firm Grow Intelligence. And she told the UN Security Council that the Russia-Ukraine war was not the cause of the food security crisis, but simply adding fuel to a fire that was long burning. So it's a pretty rough situation. And the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken this week accused Russia of using food as a weapon. I think Russia recently said, well, there's efforts ongoing to reopen the kind of sea channels from Ukraine to get food exports going again. But since Russia now controls that side of Ukraine, they're only willing to do it once sanctions are being reviewed, I believe. Yeah, I mean, what do you guys think? Do you think that the world is in a perilous situation at the moment when it comes to this global food crisis? And is there anything that we can do to fix the problem?
It's a very big question. I feel like already, I think most people are aware of the problem because, at least in the Western world, prices are going up, right? That can only mean things are going to get a lot worse.
Have you noticed this? Have you noticed this in doing your local shops? Has food gone up for you? Because, I mean, food is going up everywhere, but I think the main kind of people noticing this problem are sadly going to be in, the second and third world kind of countries that are most at risk of this kind of food deprivation. Countries that were not the wealthiest to begin with and have just coming off the back of a pandemic now.
Yeah, I mean, just recently India announced it was going to cease sending, was it rice crops abroad? It was going to basically prioritize all domestic customers first because they're getting so short on supplies. I think Sri Lanka, sorry. Hasn't Sri Lanka just, it's basically collapsing as we speak because it's run out of food. Its political system's just gone into turmoil.
Run out of everything, really, isn't it? Like
it's defaulted on its debts for the first time in its history, just the past couple of weeks. So already we're seeing those countries, and I imagine in Africa we're about to see a domino effect as well.
I mean, according to the World Food Programme, they estimate 49 million people face emergency levels of hunger. And the number of people on the brink of starvation across the Sahel region, which I believe is, where is it, across like Mali, Niger, Chad, and Sudan, like that kind of area, I think.
Right.
That has increased tenfold since pre-pandemic levels.
Bloody hell.
Wow.
Like so people on the brink of starvation is massively increasing, and that it's this domino effect, isn't it, of the pandemic, which is incredibly poor timing, of course, the war as well, but also global warming and issues around that have been going on for decades. So it's as you said, it's just adding fuel to an already burning fire, but at an alarming rate. And ideally, the world, of course, would come together to release these food supplies from being held in the zone of conflict, especially in Ukraine. But honestly, I mean, as long as that can be held as a political tool, it's going to be, isn't it? I think we'll see more of this protectionism over food. People will hang on to it for their own populations. I mean, the global supply of food will gradually grind to a halt at least over the next couple of years, I think, while the war is going on. It's definitely troubling times.
It'll be interesting to see how it is for nations like Britain, which have become almost the model of the capitalist dream of outsourcing all your primary industries, all the mining, all the farming. We import so much so that we can have a primarily services-dominated economy where people work in offices and have relatively comfortable lives. It'll be interesting to see the political dynamics over the coming years as countries like India, like Ukraine, who are the producers, suddenly say, sorry, we're going to prioritize our own people. You can fend for yourselves. And I assume mostly it'll just express itself as a massive economic crisis as the cost of living skyrockets. But it may also express itself as goodness knows what. Maybe there'll be some kind of need to do an emergency World War II style.
Dig for victory, Robin.
Yeah, dig for victory. We're all going to become land girls and grow crops that we haven't grown here for about 80 years because we've relied on the third world to provide us our food.
I think that may be a genuine possibility. I don't want to be alarmist or hyperbolic, but you're maybe thinking like longer term, not just at the effects of the war, but climate change. Countries are going to be increasingly inward looking and focusing on their own population. That when they can no longer like export additional foods, that's what they're going to do. They're going to prioritize their own population. So we are going to have to start thinking about that. What have we got an abundance of? Potatoes, isn't it? That's our main
whiskey mining.
Main
that's true. Yeah, whiskey mining.
But I think potatoes is our main like grain over here, isn't it?
Is it? Okay.
Yes. And other grains, really, isn't it? Like barley and
barley
is quite common.
Yeah, barley must be. All the beer that we drink, barley's got to be.
Yeah, we need barley to make our whiskey and beer.
But I wonder if that will become like, maybe like barley is we can no longer use it for all the beer that we produce. We've got to prioritize at some point in the future.
It's just hit me. Yeah, those raw ingredients for beer and whiskey are going to make beer and whiskey even more expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I should stock up.
That's Robin's takeaway from the global food crisis. Stock up on beer and whiskey. I also saw an interesting article this week about the potential, touching on the subject of using food as a weapon, and something that we may see more of in the future. But it was an issue regarding cybersecurity, and a lot of farms, not just in this country but across the world, are increasingly becoming autonomous, using robots to do a lot of the farming. As farms become bigger, they have to supply far greater numbers of people. So it's natural that farms are turning to automation. Modern smart farm machinery, however, is apparently vulnerable to malicious hackers, and this could potentially leave global food supply chains exposed to risk. So, for instance, if there's an automatic crop sprayer, then a hacker could like just drive this into a ditch or something and take it out of use. And then obviously this could be miles away from anyone, and could really affect the crops by something quite simple. There's not a huge amount of cybersecurity in this area. I think that's
quite shocking.
It seems to be an area that's open to exploits and weaknesses.
I wonder what that is. You'd thought in this day and age, anybody developing that kind of technology would think about cybersecurity, right?
You'd imagine so.
That's a very good point.
You'd imagine that there'd be a growing industry for cybersecurity in this space. If people are focusing on your smart appliances and making sure that they're secure from hackers, surely there'd be a much greater aversion of resources towards this.
Yeah,
that's crazy. That's crazy, man.
So I mean, what do you think that food is going to be used as a weapon in maybe like proxy wars, or like how we don't have actual wars between countries as like major countries as much these days? I mean, I know there is a pretty huge war going on right now in the European sphere, but generally like a war between Russia and China might not be fought, or Russia and the US, or US and China may not be fought soldiers fighting each other, but they could be fought by hacking their kind of agricultural sectors. What do you think about that?
100%. It will definitely be a tool that's on the table. We know that Russia, for example, loves its cyber warfare. They definitely would not be above doing that in any kind of war situation, even if it's not total war. I can see them, if they go to war with Britain and we're fighting in, I don't know, Eastern Europe, they would send spies over here to mess with whatever machinery we've got. I can definitely believe that. I also think, to some extent, you ask about it, and specifically relating to the technology, which, by the way, I didn't know that this technology existed for farmers. It kind of makes sense, but in my head, that's still like 1990s sci-fi movie
Well, it reminds me
fiction.
it's Interstellar, isn't it? Interstellar.
Oh
is the
yeah,
most
with all the
recent
drone.
one.
Yeah. So that aside, we've already got that. So obviously, the economic sanctions right now they're broad. They're not targeting food, but we're using them as a weapon against Russia in the war in Ukraine. And then, of course, for the last few decades, North Korea has been completely cut off from imports from any country except China, and China does it secretly. And imagine if China just stopped. Already, food is used as a weapon against North Korea. Now there's just a more sophisticated, targeted way of doing it, which is to mess with the machines that farm the food. Although I suppose you could argue there's an easy solution, not necessarily easy solution, but a simple solution, which is the machines aren't working. Let's employ our own people to do the job of these machines.
I mean, it's almost. Do you think there could even be a worry in the future? Like we kind of say how the average person now has no idea how to procure food if the worst came to the worst. We don't know how to farm. We don't know how to raise livestock or slaughter animals. We're kind of at the mercy that these things will just be provided to us. Maybe in the future, these automated farming equipment will become so prevalent on farms, people won't even know how to farm if these things.
It's true. Yeah.
If these things break down, they won't know how to use the traditional equipment. Although that, I'm sure, is decades, if not centuries away from becoming a problem.
That could happen. But what defines a farmer is their ability to program a farm vehicle.
Yeah.
I could tell it to go in a circle. I don't know how to actually plant the seeds.
But also the reason they're using this equipment is because they've got to provide more crops and food to more people, that it's just not feasible to do it by hand unless you had a huge workforce, which a lot of these farms don't.
They can't sustain the cost of employing that many people.
Yeah.
Because we expect food to be so cheap. Yeah.
I mean, it does seem like the natural progression, therefore, is that food prices will continue to rise globally. Hopefully, if people aren't being paid enough to want to work on farms, I mean, the technology is one way to go. But I know that here in the UK, there's been a huge drive, hasn't there, for people to come back to the UK from other European countries or stay in the UK and farm. Right, it's been one of the issues with people coming over to the UK, wasn't it, from Ukraine as refugees? It was like, are they going to come over and work for this country? Which is, it's a bad way of looking at it, but but that was one of the Priti Patel was very much interested in making sure that people coming over are adding to the economy in this particular way. Hopefully, I mean that farmers are paid more and paid fairly as a result of this. But we shall see. I mean, back to the point of food being used as a weapon. I mean, we can see it already with what Russia's doing around like the Black Sea coast and stopping the shipping lines and blocking the Ukrainian ports from releasing a lot of their goods, which are then going to waste. So it's already being used as a weapon of war. And I mean, it's almost like a cyclical issue where if there's wars between nations because of a lack of food, then food therefore gets blocked as a weapon of war, which then causes more issues with lack of global food supply, which then causes more conflict. And so there could quite easily be a bit of a spiraling effect, a bit of a race to the bottom here, where we see more conflict globally as a result of this kind of reactionary, governments reacting to a lack of food by being more insular and preventing people from exporting food, and then that, of course, then causes more conflict. So I don't know. We're in perilous times. And
is there any hope? Is there any hope on the horizon that we can avoid the worst effects of this global food crisis, which we are no doubt in currently?
On like an individual level, simply not wasting as much food as we do would make it go a lot further. And that I'm really pointing my finger at households, but mainly also businesses. Like, there are people who do not have enough money to buy food at the moment, and it's only getting worse. We're having to prioritize other things, and going short of food. Making sure that isn't being thrown away by businesses, and ensuring that there are means by which it can be redistributed if it's not being used by certain industries or certain people, is a fairly, I mean, logistically it's tough, but should be an easy fix in regards to, redistributing food. So that's one on kind of like a more regional level. But yeah, a lot of this, especially when it comes down to the war in Ukraine, Russia. I mean, that's about them sorting their shit out and seeing the bigger picture of, okay, this could actually affect millions and millions of people, could starve to death as a result of a worsening food crisis. Then, of course, there's actioning on global warming. We've got to get a hold of that, otherwise this is only going to get worse. So there are macro issues that need to be dealt with at, of course, the government level.
Well, the World Bank has announced a 4-point plan to tackle the food crisis globally.
4-point plan.
4-point plan, yeah.
4 plans, and we are back in business.
They point out they already have an existing $18.7 billion invested in projects which connect to food and nutrition security problems, covering agriculture and natural resource management. But they've just announced they're going to make fund $12 billion worth of new projects for the next 15 months to deal with the food crisis. And they're going to do this in 4 ways. They're going to support production and producers by removing input trade barriers, focusing on more efficient use of fertilizers, repurposing public policies and expenditures to better support farmers and output. They're going to use this money to facilitate increased trade, which is to avoid export restrictions that increase global food prices and import restrictions that discourage production in developing countries. They're going to scale up targeted nutrition-sensitive social protection programs for the most vulnerable households. And they're going to invest in sustainable food and nutrition security, which is to strengthen food systems to make them more resilient to rising risks such as conflict, climate change, pests and diseases, and trade disruptions and economic shocks. They're trying to balance immediate and short-term needs with long-term investments. Sadly, they point out that they had to do this back in 2007, 2008 during the recession. Yeah. But the good news there is that because they've already done it 14 years ago, they've kind of got the systems in place to do it again. And this time they're promising to do more than they did back then. So, I mean, what do you think? I know I just rattled it off quite quickly, but do you think the World Bank throwing $12 billion at a problem is going to solve it?
I mean, that's it, isn't it? I'm not sure. I don't know enough, to be honest. I'm not an expert on this topic. I don't think any of us are, but I don't know enough to decide whether this is a problem that throwing money at can actually fix, or if it's requiring a different change of thought with how we live our lives and how we all kind of consume food, I guess.
12 billion is a lot of money. It's not that much when trying to tackle world food hunger. It's like,
it doesn't feel like a lot, does it?
It feels like a drop in the ocean, really.
Yeah.
And all the money's everything. Of course, it's all about building the systems that are needed to help the problem, isn't it? More than just money. But yeah, to me, that seems like a very small amount, considering the scale of the issue.
I hope it works. I'm glad they're doing something. They seem like they're in a position to do something. They've got the money and they've got the experience from the recession 14 years ago. But more than that needs to happen, like you say.
I mean, I appreciate you putting a brave face on and trying to put a positive spin on this, Robin. This still seems pretty bleak to me right now. But fingers crossed that the world is able to fix this problem before it becomes a huge, huge issue, more than it already is.